Liam Harlow had two things worth keeping: a 7-year-old daughter who still believed stuffed rabbits could hold opinions, and a car design that had taken him 3 years to build from nothing. When billionaire Sebastian Grant invited him into the Manhattan Tower, Liam believed it was the chance that would change everything. 6 months later, the car appeared on the cover of every luxury automotive magazine under the name Grant Phantom and Sebastian, stood before a crowd of thousands accepting applause with the ease of a man who had never once considered that something might not belong to him. There was no mention of Liam's name, not one line, not one footnote. Liam sat alone in his rented Detroit apartment that evening, holding a rejection letter from Grant Automotive's legal team, listening through the hallway door as his daughter asked why he was so quiet. Follow now, so you don't miss the story of one ordinary father and the truth that shook everything. The apartment on the 3rd floor of a building near the corner of Woodward and Holbrook was the kind of place that stayed cold 2 weeks longer than it should every spring. Liam had lived there for 2 years with his daughter Violet, and in that time he had grown accustomed to the particular sound the radiator made at 2 in the morning, a low, rhythmic knock that was less comforting than it was simply familiar. He worked at a drafting table wedged between the bookshelf and the window, in a room that was technically the dining area, but had never once held a dining table. Most nights after Violet was asleep, he would sit in front of his design software with a cup of coffee that was still warm for the first 20 minutes and then irrelevant for the next 4 hours, and this was how his days and nights had run for 3 years. The file on his computer was named Project Ember, which was not a dramatic choice but an honest one. It had begun the way embers begin, from something already burning low. His wife, Sarah, had died in a traffic accident when Violet was 4 years old. The details were not the kind Liam repeated out loud, but they lived somewhere behind everything he did in a way that did not require language. He had left his staff designer position at a mid-tier automotive firm in the months after the funeral, not because he could not work, but because Violet needed someone who could pick her up from school at 3:15 every day without exception, and the company's flexibility policy was precisely as flexible as a steel beam. He went independent, taking small contracts where he could find them, building a quiet and unremarkable reputation as someone thorough, reliable, and not particularly expensive. It was not glamorous. It was enough. The apartment was not the life he had imagined, but Violet had a good school and a bedroom she had painted with butterflies using an inexpensive craft set from the drugstore, and most mornings, she came to breakfast in mismatched socks with firm opinions about which cereal was superior, and Liam had come to believe that the shape of a life could be found in smaller things than most people thought to look for. Project Ember had started the way grief sometimes redirects itself into the hands rather than staying in the chest. Liam was a structural thinker by nature, and where other designers began with the surface, the silhouette, the stance, what a car looked like, standing still in showroom light, Liam began with what held everything together underneath. The central idea behind Ember had taken shape slowly over 3 years, a modular chassis architecture that allowed individual components to be replaced along a tiered pricing structure without compromising the overall structural integrity. The concept addressed a problem that every premium electric vehicle manufacturer was currently bleeding money over: the catastrophic depreciation caused by battery degradation and the prohibitive cost of full system repair. Liam had modeled 3 different manufacturing scenarios, written 9 drafts of the cost framework, and scrapped and rebuilt the structural geometry twice before he felt the solution was not merely clever but correct, which was the only standard he trusted. He documented every iteration, every revision, every dead end and correction in a cloud-based archive that time-stamped automatically each time a file was opened, modified, or saved. He had not built this system out of legal caution. He had built it because he liked being able to look back at where an idea had come from. It was a habit of mind. He had no particular reason to think it would ever matter for anything beyond his own curiosity. On the night that would turn out to be the last ordinary night for a long time, Violet padded into the workroom at some point after midnight in her socks, carrying the small gray stuffed rabbit she called Buttons. She climbed into her father's lap without asking, which was not unusual, and looked at the screen for a moment. "Is that your car, Daddy?" Liam said it was. Is it the most beautiful one in the world? He told her he thought it might be, but that nobody knew about it yet. Violet considered this with the gravity that 7-year-olds sometimes apply to information adults treat too lightly. She nodded once, tucked buttons under her chin, and was asleep against his shoulder before the next revision was finished. Grant Automotive occupied the top 12 floors of a building on Park Avenue that had been designed specifically to make people feel the correct size when approaching it, which is to say, small. Sebastian Grant had built the company from an inherited mid-market brand into something that showed up on yacht decks and in the driveways of people who were photographed at charity galas. He was 47, physically composed in the way that only discipline and an unlimited clothing budget can produce together, and had a particular talent for speaking in front of cameras that made every announcement feel less like a press release and more like a gift he was choosing to give the world. He had been on the cover of 4 business magazines in the previous 2 years and had a foundation that did work he occasionally mentioned in speeches. He was not, by the standards available to him, a man who needed to take anything from anyone, which is perhaps why it had never fully occurred to him that what he was doing was theft. Connor Reed called Liam on a Tuesday evening in October. They had worked together years earlier at the mid-tier firm, and their friendship had survived. The kind of slow drift that happens when 2 lives move in structurally different directions. Connor had gone into independent consulting, made connections at the kind of industry dinners Liam no longer attended, and generally operated in a world where relationships were currency and information was quietly traded. He called to say that Grant Automotive was in a specific kind of trouble that money alone could not resolve. Their electric flagship program had been stalled for 18 months. The internal engineering team was producing work that was technically competent but conceptually flat, and Sebastian Grant wanted something disruptive, the kind of idea that could announce the company's arrival in the premium electric market with force that no committee could manufacture. Through a contact of a contact, Connor said, there was an opening for an external pitch under a standard non-disclosure arrangement. Grant's people were willing to look at outside concepts. Liam was quiet for a moment. He knew what an unsecured pitch meant. It was the kind of meeting where ideas entered a room and were not always accompanied back out by the person who had brought them. He said as much. Connor told him the non-disclosure agreement would be in place before any materials were shared, that it was standard, that Grant's legal team was professional. There was a pause, and then Connor said, "This is the kind of door that doesn't stay open." Liam looked at the stack of bills on the refrigerator, held down by a coffee mug. He looked at the folder on his computer labeled Project Ember. He agreed. 2 days before the meeting, the woman who usually watched Violet after school called to say she had a fever and could not help. Liam had no backup. He explained to Violet that they would be taking a train trip to a very tall building in New York City, and that while he was in a meeting, she would need to sit quietly in the waiting area with buttons and her library book and not make any noise. Violet agreed with the seriousness of someone who understood that this was important. The 38th floor of the Grant Automotive Tower had a waiting area designed to communicate stability and the particular calm that only comes from spending serious money on chairs. Violet sat in one of those chairs with her feet not quite reaching the floor, buttons balanced on her knees, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling glass at the city below, with the expression of someone doing their best to be impressed. A receptionist glanced at her, then at Liam, and the look needed no translation. Inside the conference room, Sebastian Grant sat at the head of a table long enough to land a small aircraft on. 3 senior directors flanked him on either side, and at the far end sat a lawyer who did not introduce himself and who, over the next 50 minutes, did not speak once. The non-disclosure agreement was presented before anything else, 2 pages, cleanly formatted. Liam read it with careful attention. It was thorough in protecting the confidential information of Grant Automotive. It did not include any reciprocal protection for information that Liam might introduce. He had no personal counsel with him. He signed. The presentation took 45 minutes. Liam did not use the word revolutionary. He did not build toward a dramatic reveal. He walked through the architecture, the structural logic of the modular chassis, the way the component tier system functioned, the calculations behind the depreciation curve, the cost modeling across 3 different manufacturing scenarios. He spoke the way engineers speak When they have lived in section, Sebastian Grant, who had been listening with his chin resting lightly in one hand and the expression of a man who had heard many things before, sat slightly straighter in his chair. It was a small movement. Liam did not notice it. The lawyer at the end of the table noticed it. One of the directors noticed it. Sebastian noticed that they noticed and recalibrated his posture, returning to his previous attitude of relaxed authority. When the presentation finished, Sebastian extended his hand and said the material was interesting. He said his team would need time for technical evaluation, which was standard, and that licensing structures, compensation frameworks, and timeline would all be discussed after the evaluation was complete. He asked Liam to leave behind the complete file set. Liam transferred the files to a USB drive while the directors watched, then handed it across the table. The drive contained every component of Project Ember, the original CAD drawings, the full structural specifications, the research documentation, the cost modeling, and the development notes written across 3 years of late nights. It also contained something Sebastian's team almost certainly did not register: a folder called Archive, holding the entire time-stamped backup sequence from the cloud system, organized by date, from the first sketch to the most recent revision. Liam had included it by habit, because he always included it when transferring his work, because it was the record of where the work had come from, and he had never had any reason to think that habit would one day be the most important decision he made. Out in the waiting area, Violet jumped down from the chair the moment the conference room door opened. "Did you win?" Liam crouched to her level. "I don't know yet." Violet regarded this answer with measured skepticism. "Buttons thinks you did," she said. On the taxi to the hotel that evening, Liam looked out at the East River. Something in him had not settled, the way a room does not settle after a door has been left slightly open. The silence lasted 3 months. Liam sent follow-up emails every 2 weeks measured, professional, never desperate. The responses came from an assistant, never from anyone with a decision-making title, and they all said some version of the same thing. The evaluation was ongoing. Connor Reed became progressively harder to reach. His responses to texts shortened, then came later, then sometimes not at all. Liam noted this without fully naming it. The way a person notes a change in weather they are not yet ready to call a storm. It was a Monday morning in January when the Detroit Auto Show held its annual industry keynote, streamed live. Liam watched on his laptop while Violet sat across the kitchen table eating cereal, buttons propped against the orange juice glass. The stream opened with market projections and announcements from second-tier manufacturers. Then the feed cut to the Grant Automotive segment, and Sebastian Grant walked out from the left side of a stage that had been designed to feel like a cathedral-high ceilings, dramatic lighting, the kind of sound system that makes a man's voice feel like weather. The screen behind him was dark for a moment. Then it lit up with a car. Liam set down his coffee cup. The vehicle on the screen was called the Grant Phantom. Sebastian described it as the culmination of years of internal research and development, a full rethinking of premium electric architecture, designed from the ground up by Grant Automotive's engineering division. He used the phrase flexible, segmented architecture. He used the phrase component tier replacement system. He described the relationship between the structural frame and the battery module in language that was not close to Liam's documented phrasing. It was the same language, the same sequence, the same conceptual framing, right down to the depreciation curve analogy that Liam had used in his development notes to explain why the problem existed in the first place. These were not ideas that existed in any public record. They were not phrases drawn from existing literature. They were words that Liam had written alone in a room at 2 in the morning in a Detroit apartment, and they were now coming out of Sebastian Grant's mouth on a stage before several thousand people and several million watching on screens. "Buttons thinks the car looks a little funny," Violet said from across the table, not looking up from her cereal. Liam did not respond. He watched Sebastian shake hands with the mayor, watched the confetti fall, watched the assembled crowd lift their phones in unison to photograph a car that Liam had built in his head and his machine and his 3 years of sleepless nights. He stood up, walked to the bathroom, and locked the door. He stood at the mirror for a long time. He did not make a sound. That afternoon, Liam drafted a formal written notice to Grant Automotive's legal department, calm in language and specific in detail. He identified the concept, the timeline, the pitch meeting, the NDA and its limitations, and requested a conversation to address the discrepancy. The response arrived in less than 24 hours, not from Grant Automotive directly, but from the law firm that represented them on intellectual property matters. The letter was 7 paragraphs of precise legal language that ultimately communicated 3 things: that Grant Automotive had violated no agreement, that the Phantom had been developed entirely by their internal team, and that if Liam Harlow continued to make what it called unsubstantiated allegations against Grant Automotive and its principals, the company would have no choice but to pursue legal remedies. Liam read the letter twice. He set it face down on the table. From the hallway, "Daddy, are you coming for dinner?" What followed over the next 6 weeks was the kind of campaign that does not announce itself as a campaign. A post appeared on a well-trafficked engineering forum, anonymous, articulate, and confident in its framing, describing a pattern of behavior by an unnamed independent contractor in the Detroit metro area who had allegedly attempted to leverage loosely conceived concepts against automotive manufacturers by Devon acceptors, claiming intellectual property violations when companies declined to engage. The post named no names. It did not need to. The industry was small enough that the combination of timing, geography, and specificity pointed in one direction. Within a week, 3 smaller publications had run pieces on intellectual property disputes in the automotive startup space, citing the forum post as background, without identifying Liam directly. The phrase that appeared most consistently across all of them was unsubstantiated allegations, as though it had arrived pre-packaged. Liam found Giselle Ward through the archive of a business publication that had published a 4-part investigation 18 months earlier on patent suppression in the consumer technology sector. The series had been sourced from internal documents, had named 3 executives by name, and had resulted in 2 federal investigations and 1 resignation. He called the publication's number and was transferred twice before reaching a voicemail. She called back 3 days later. They met at a coffee shop near the Greektown neighborhood on a Wednesday afternoon, and she arrived 4 minutes late, ordered a black coffee, and sat down across from him with the expression of someone who had heard many versions of this kind of story and had learned to be efficient with her initial assessment. She listened without interrupting for 20 minutes, while Liam laid out the full sequence: the pitch, the NDA, the USB drive, the 3 months of silence, the auto show, the Phantom, the legal letter, the forum post. When he finished, she said, "What do you have besides your own account?" Liam mentioned the cloud archive and the timestamps. "Can that be produced in a form that would hold up under evidentiary scrutiny?" He did not answer immediately. She looked at him steadily. "When you have something more concrete, call me." She picked up her coffee, stood, and walked out. She did not seem unkind. She seemed precise. 2 days after the meeting with Giselle, Liam's last 2 active design contracts were quietly terminated. Neither client offered a detailed explanation. One sent a message that read only, "I can't have any association with an active legal dispute, nothing personal." The other simply stopped responding to emails. Liam sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and did the arithmetic he had been avoiding for 3 weeks. He had approximately 2 months of operating expenses remaining. Connor Reed called on a Friday night not to help. He called in the careful, apologetic tone of a man who had decided that the most honest thing he could do was tell the person he had wronged to stop fighting. He said Liam should consider the realities. He said that the company Liam was dealing with had resources that made the outcome of any legal conflict effectively predetermined. He said that accepting a settlement, even an inadequate one, was sometimes the only rational decision available. Liam let him finish. Then he asked, without raising his voice, "Did they pay you to stay quiet?" The line went silent for a long time. Then Connor said, "I'm sorry, Liam." The call ended. Liam set the phone on the table and looked at it. Violet appeared in the kitchen doorway holding buttons. "Who was that?" "An old friend," Liam said. "Is he still your friend?" Violet asked. Liam considered this for a moment. "I don't know yet," he said. "There is a particular quality to the silence in an apartment when the financial floor beneath a family begins to thin. It is not dramatic, there is no single moment of collapse, no obvious rupture. What there is instead is a gradual narrowing of the space between what exists and what is needed. And Liam felt it that winter, the way you feel a room getting colder without being able to identify the exact moment the heat went off. He still made Violet's lunches every morning. He still walked her to school and picked her up at 3:15 without exception. He still read to her at night and answered her questions about why clouds were different shapes and whether rabbits dreamed and what it meant when a car engine made a sound like a cough. The routines held, but underneath them, the arithmetic on the legal pad was not improving. He pulled up the cloud archive one evening and spent 2 hours going through it with the methodical attention of someone looking for something they hope to find and are not entirely certain is there. Everything was intact. The first file creation, a rough structural diagram, just an early concept, was timestamped at 11:47 at night, with automatic metadata that included the device identifier, the software version, and the geolocation tag that confirmed it had been created in Detroit 3.5 years earlier. Every revision carried the same structure. There were 843 time-stamped entries covering the entire development of Project Ember, from the first sketch to the final submission-ready package. No file had been created after the pitch meeting. Every entry preceded it, sometimes by months, sometimes by years. The record was complete and sequential, and entirely his. Liam printed the archive log 12 pages, hole-punched them, and put them in a manila folder. He labeled it in pencil. Then he sat at the table with the folder in front of him and understood clearly that this was necessary, but not sufficient. A timestamp proved sequence. It did not prove intent. Grant Automotive could argue parallel development, that their engineers had arrived at the same architecture independently, that the terminology coincidence reflected shared technical vocabulary, that the structural similarities were the natural result of multiple teams working on the same engineering problem with access to the same published research. They had a legal team paid to construct exactly that argument and construct it well. What Liam needed was something from inside the building. Giselle Ward, in the weeks following their coffee shop meeting, had not been idle. She had not called Liam and had given no indication from the outside that she was doing anything at all. But she had pulled the full corporate filing history of Grant Automotive's Phantom project, had spoken with 2 former Grant employees under background-only agreements, and had begun mapping the internal project timeline against the date of Liam's pitch. The gap between the pitch and the first recorded internal engineering directive on the Phantom's chassis architecture was 11 days. She noted this. She began making calls to names she found in the margins of filing documents, the kind of names that appear once or twice in secondary credits and are forgotten by everyone except someone who is specifically looking for them. Isaac Palmer had spent 12 years inside Grant Automotive's engineering division, becoming the kind of person that large organizations depend on without acknowledging the one who understood not just the assigned work, but the KMDUF, entire system around it, who could identify a load-bearing problem in a design review before anyone else had noticed the question forming, who arrived an hour early and stayed 2 hours late because the work was genuinely interesting to him. He had been a senior design engineer on the Phantom project from the beginning. 3 weeks after the Phantom's debut at the auto show, when the press coverage was still running, when Sebastian Grant was still doing interviews about innovation and vision, and the courage to reimagine what luxury transportation could mean, Isaac was called into a room by a vice president. He had met twice and told that his president position was being eliminated as part of a departmental restructuring, standard severance package, standard non-disclosure requirement attached to the package. Isaac signed. He accepted the check. He drove home in a car he had designed test specifications for and sat in his driveway for 22 minutes before going inside. It was not the termination itself that eventually led Isaac to act. It was something older and smaller. In the weeks before the Phantom launch, during the final engineering review, one of the junior chassis team members had asked Isaac where the modular framework had originated. The idea had appeared in the development documents suddenly and completely, without the iterative record that normally accompanied internally generated concepts. Isaac had been present in the room 11 days after Liam's pitch, when Sebastian Grant had walked in holding a printed packet and set it on the table and said, "This is the direction we are going." When a director asked where the material had come from, Sebastian said, with the finality of someone closing a conversation, "Internal development." Isaac had looked at the packet. He had looked at the language in it, specific, idiosyncratic, the kind of phrasing that an individual develops over years of working alone inside an idea. He had said nothing. He had gone back to his work. He had told himself it was not his business. And in the professional sense that was true. And in the human sense, it was something he had not fully resolved in the months since. He found Giselle Ward's byline on a search for intellectual property coverage. He emailed her from an account he had created for that purpose. He identified himself by his full name in the email, not anonymously, not under a pseudonym, because he had decided that if he was going to do this, he was going to do it as himself. What he provided was a sequence of internal emails from the Phantom's development period, which he had retained in a personal archive maintained across his tenure at the company. Among them was a message sent by Sebastian Grant to the full engineering leadership team on a Thursday morning, 11 days after Liam Harlow's pitch. The subject line read, "Direction from external concept, adapt, and internalize." Attached to the email was a document containing sections of Project Ember's core technical framework, including the modular chassis architecture, the component tier cost model, and language lifted directly from Liam's development notes. Sebastian's message directed the team to develop forward from this material as though it were our own, because going forward, it is. Giselle read the email 3 times. She verified the metadata. She cross-referenced Liam's cloud archive timestamps against the date of Sebastian's internal directive and confirmed that Liam's documentation predated the pitch by 3.5 years and predated the directive by 11 days. She brought in a digital forensics consultant she had worked with on a previous investigation to independently validate the metadata integrity of Isaac's emails. The consultant's report came back in 48 hours. The emails were authentic, unaltered, and consistent with Grant Automotive's known server infrastructure. Giselle called Liam. "Not to ask questions. I need to meet with you," she said. That was all. She arrived at the coffee shop first this time. When Liam sat down, she set a folder on the table and pushed it toward him. He opened it. He found the email with the subject line that included his own work, described as something to be internalized as another company's own. He read the attached sections, his language, his architecture, his 3 years of late nights entered into evidence of a project presented to the world as Sebastian Grant's gift to the automotive industry. Liam closed the folder. He set it on the table. Something that had been held very tightly inside him for a long time, not rage, not vindication, but the specific exhaustion of a person who has known the truth and been unable to make it visible, shifted, slightly, and let some air in. The law firm's call came 2 days after Giselle's meeting with Isaac. Not from a partner, from an associate, which told Liam everything he needed to know about where Grant Automotive believed they stood. The associate was pleasant in the way that associates are trained to be pleasant, and he said that Sebastian Grant would like a brief, private conversation with Liam, offered in good faith at his earliest convenience. Liam accepted. He understood what had happened. Something had moved in a direction they had not anticipated, and Sebastian wanted to stop it before it reached a door he could not close from the inside. The meeting was held in a smaller conference room on a different floor. No row of directors, no silent lawyer at the end of the table, just Sebastian Grant and one attorney sitting across from Liam. Sebastian was wearing a charcoal suit and looked exactly as composed as a man who has never been publicly embarrassed looks before he is publicly embarrassed. He began with measured warmth, the constructed kind. He said that looking back at the handling of the external concept review, it was clear that there had been lapses in internal protocol. He said that Liam's contribution to the intellectual foundation of the Phantom deserved acknowledgement, the word selected with the care of someone choosing the least expensive item on a menu. He pushed a sheet of paper across the table with a number on it. The number was not small. It was enough to cover 2 years of lost contracts, enough to move to a larger apartment, enough to make the arithmetic on the legal pad go quiet. Liam looked at the paper. Then he looked at Sebastian Grant for a long moment, not with anger, not with the performance of moral authority, just with the steady regard of a person who has already made a decision and is waiting for the conversation to catch up with it. He pushed the paper back across the table without comment. Sebastian's composure developed a small fracture, visible at the jaw. He set his pen down. He said, and the warmth had left his voice completely, "You need to understand what you're walking into. I have 80 lawyers. You are a freelance designer from Detroit with a 7-year-old daughter. I have been in rooms like this one a great many times, and I know how they end. Walk away now, take what is being offered, and this ends here. Fight this, and I will ensure your name is attached to this dispute for the rest of your professional life." Liam stood up. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He looked at Sebastian one more time, not with drama, not with a final speech designed to be remembered, and there was nothing left he needed to prove to this man, and he had known that before he walked into the room. He walked out. Violet was on a bench in the small plaza across the street, watching a pigeon navigate a discarded pretzel with notable determination. She jumped up when she saw her father coming down the steps. She ran across to him, which she still did even at 7, which Liam privately hoped she would continue to do for as long as was physically manageable. "Done?" she asked. "Done," he said. She looked at him the way she looked at things she was trying to read carefully. "Did you take the money?" Liam shook his head. She was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded, slowly and seriously, with the expression of someone confirming a calculation they already knew the answer to. "Good," she said, "because the car belongs to you." She took his hand. They walked toward the train station. Buttons was tucked under her free arm, ears slightly bent from the afternoon, watching the city go by with the impassive serenity of someone who had never doubted the outcome. Giselle Ward's article, published on a Monday morning at 6 o'clock Eastern Time, timed for maximum reach in the financial and business news cycle. The headline read, "The engineer who built the Grant Phantom and was never told he did." The piece ran at just over 4,000 words in the digital edition, accompanied by a sidebar timeline, an annotated diagram, comparing Project Ember's structural framework against the Phantom's published specifications, and a full accounting of Isaac Palmer's identity, role, and documentation Isaac had chosen to be named, a decision that cost him something, and that he had made with clear-eyed understanding of what it cost. The article was precise, clinical, and sourced in a way that did not leave room for the word allegedly to carry much weight. The response was not slow. By 9 in the morning, the piece had been shared widely across engineering and technology communities. By noon, 3 major business publications had picked it up as a developing story. By mid-afternoon, automotive analysts were on financial news programs discussing what the revelation meant for the Phantom's product positioning and for Grant Automotive's standing in upcoming licensing negotiations with European partners. The phrase, "direction from external concept, adapt and internalize," appeared in a great many headlines before end of day. Sebastian Grant's communications team released a statement at 4:15, a single paragraph of careful language, confirming that an internal review was underway and committing to nothing further. The statement was described in most coverage as inadequate. Grant Automotive's share price closed lower on a day when the broader market had been flat. Sebastian said nothing publicly after the statement. He did not give interviews. He did not appear at the company's scheduled press event the following week, which was handled by a vice president who fielded questions about the Phantom with visible discomfort. The lights stayed on at the tower on Park Avenue. The machinery continued. But something had come loose in the arrangement between Sebastian Grant and the story he had been telling about himself, and it would not tighten back the way it had been before. David Osei contacted Liam 3 days after the article published. He was a 41-year-old intellectual property attorney who had won a landmark design rights case against a major consumer electronics company 4 years earlier, in a proceeding that established precedent for digital, timestamp evidence in concept attribution disputes. He said he had reviewed the publicly available information and the documentation Giselle had published, and that the case had clear merit and significant legal precedent implications. He was not offering his services as charity. He was offering them because the case was worth taking. Liam met with him for 2 hours in a conference room in a downtown Detroit legal building that smelled of old carpet and institutional coffee, which Liam found, against all expectation, genuinely reassuring. Connor Reed appeared at Liam's door on a Wednesday evening without calling ahead. He stood on the landing with his hands in his coat pockets, looking like a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say several times and then lost it on the stairs. Liam opened the door and waited. Connor said that Grant Automotive had approached him 6 days after Liam's pitch had known about their connection, had offered a consulting contract in exchange for stepping back from any involvement with Liam's submission and maintaining what they called appropriate discretion. He had taken it. He was now prepared to provide a written statement and, if the case proceeded to formal proceedings, to testify. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was telling Liam what he had done and what he was willing to do now. Liam listened until he was finished. "Why now?" Liam asked. Connor said, "Because my name is going to come out anyway, and I'd rather it come out because I chose to tell the truth. It was not an entirely noble motivation. It was, at least, an honest one." Liam nodded. "All right," he said. Connor left. From the kitchen. "Who was that, Daddy?" "Someone who made a mistake," Liam said. "Is he going to fix it?" Liam thought about this. "He's trying." The case settled out of court 11 weeks later. The terms of the settlement were not published in full, as is customary in agreements of that nature. But the portions disclosed publicly included 3 items. Grant Automotive formally recognized Liam Harlow as the originating author of the chassis architecture and component tier framework incorporated in the Grant Phantom. Grant Automotive paid a licensing compensation figure that Liam was not authorized to disclose, but that David Osei had described before the signing as more than adequate and less than everything, which is what settlements are. And Grant Automotive published a formal correction to the Phantom's product documentation, acknowledging the external design contribution. Sebastian Grant's name did not appear in the correction. It appeared in the legal filings, in the coverage, in the record, but not in any direct acknowledgement, not in any room where Liam was present. The lights on Park Avenue stayed on. Sebastian continued to run the company. He had been protected by the transaction at a cost that was significant but manageable, and he would carry the event forward in whatever way people like him carry the events that do not destroy them, which is to say, inward, and not in ways that produce visible change. This was not the ending that stories are supposed to have. It was the ending that most things have. Liam had understood for a while that what he was after was not Sebastian Grant's contrition. He was after the record. The record was now correct. On the evening after the settlement documents were signed, Liam took Violet to the pizza place 3 blocks from their apartment. The one with the red-checked plastic tablecloths and the television mounted too high on the wall, and the garlic knots that Violet considered the most important food category in existence. She ate 2 slices with the focused silence of someone doing serious work. Then she wiped her mouth with a paper napkin and looked at her father with the particular directness that she had apparently inherited from some part of her personality that had nothing to do with anyone she had learned it from. "Are you famous now?" she asked. Liam said, "A little bit, maybe." She thought about this. "Does being famous mean we get more pizza?" He said he thought they could probably manage more pizza either way. She nodded. "Buttons says we should celebrate." Liam said Buttons had good instincts. Giselle Ward sent a message the following morning. "Glad it landed right." Liam wrote back. "Thank you." She replied, "I didn't do you a favor. I did my job." He appreciated that she said it that way. 2 weeks after the settlement, Liam rearranged the workroom. He added a shelf along the wall above the drafting table, a low one, within Violet's reach, and she immediately populated it with drawings she had done at school, one small ceramic cat she had made in an art class, and buttons, positioned at the center with the authority of a figure who had earned their placement. On the table, a new file was open, a blank document, time-stamped automatically by the cloud system at the moment of creation, the same system that had run quietly in the background for 3.5 years, recording everything, waiting for the moment when the record would matter. The new file had no title yet. Liam looked at it for a long time. Then he picked up the stylus and began. Violet was asleep in the next room. The radiator made its familiar sound. The apartment was cold in the way Detroit apartments are cold in early spring, 2 weeks longer than they should be. And Liam Harlow, widower, father, engineer, The man whose name was now in the record